Try to make this quick. Hey, how's it going, everyone? I finally got some time in my hands, and I figured it'd be a good chance for me to sit down and talk with y'all and fill in about this whole agriculture process I've been dealing with. So, if y'all been watching my videos, you know that I'm a new landowner and a new bee owner. You know, I was forced into getting honeybees when I received a letter in the mail. The letter was from the tax assessor's office for the county that the property is in. You know, the letter stated that I had to renew the current ag exemption in place or be liable for 5 years of back taxes. You know, seeing as though I just bought the land, the last thing I wanted to do was be liable for 5 years of back taxes. You know, so I'm shocked. I'm scrambling on what to do next, and I'm doing my research. And the only thing I found out I can do was raise honeybees. And I was fortunate enough to find someone to clear my property, at least clear out about 4 acres of it. And I found someone selling honeybees within a few hours away, and I ordered 7 hives. I went and picked up the hives, put them on the property. I bought the equipment I needed, the outfit I needed, the bee suit, and I started maintaining these honeybees. Well, a couple weeks later, you know, it's time for me to submit my application. So I go there with a blank form. I was told by a relative, like, you should go there with a blank form and have them help you out. You know, that way they can't deny you if they help you with it. Of course, I was denied, but it sounded like a good idea. And so I went there, spoke to the front clerk, and I said, hey, I would like some help filling this application out so I know I do so correctly. And she said, all right. She said, let me see if I have someone available. Fortunately enough, there was a male appraiser available, and he helped me out. Now, we went through line by line, and everything I needed, he helped me out to make sure I filled it out correctly. Now, when it was completely filled out, I gave him the form back, and I said, is there anything more you need? He said, nope, that should be it. He said, you should receive some kind of communication, you know, from an appraiser, seeing if they want to inspect the hive or inspect the property. I said, all right, that's fine. So a few weeks go by, and I hadn't heard anything. So I called back the tax assessor's office, and I said, hey, just want to check on the status of my application. And he puts me on hold for a second, comes back and says they still haven't gotten to it, and that keep an eye out again. I said, all right. Well, that very next week, I received a letter in the mail. The letter stated I was denied. It said I was denied for lack of proof of sales. Now, I didn't know I was supposed to provide any kind of proof of sales, as the application didn't state anything. And then when I talked to the appraiser about it, he didn't say anything that I needed that. So again, I was shocked. So now I'm trying to figure out what I got to do to submit an appeal. And so I got my appeal paperwork together. I got some more pictures in place. I had a log sheet for everything I was doing with the hives, from inspecting to feeding to everything I had to do with them. So she said, do you want to speak to an appraiser? I said, yes, please, if there's one available. Unfortunately, there was an appraiser available, which was a lady, and I went to her office. Now, the clerk passed off my appeal packet to the appraiser, and I sat down with the appraiser now. So I'm talking with her, and she's asking me, well, what exactly are you wanting? I said, I want everything that has to do with the ag exemption policy, especially for honeybees. So I want to make sure that I know what I'm supposed to be doing. And she's like, well, everything you need is on the sheet of paper. You know, this very short, condensed, not elaborated at all, this two-sided sheet of paper. And I said, this is it? And she's like, yeah. She's like, everything you know is on the sheet of paper. I'm like, it doesn't state very much, though. I figured there'd be more than that when it comes to, you know, agriculture and agriculture exemptions. And she said, no, this is what we go by right here, this short piece of paper. And she flips it to the back and she shows me that table. You know, it says the amount of acreage you have for the amount of honeybees you need. And I said, all right. And she flips it back to the front. I said, well, right here, it states, see additional guidelines. I said, where's that at? And she flips it over to the back and tells me that table. I said, there's got to be more than that. And she tells me, or she asks me, well, when did you buy the property? I said, well, I bought the property in December. I said, I received this letter in March, and so I went ahead and applied because it was due at the end of April, May 1st, I believe. And she said, well, actually, you're supposed to have your packet in place in January. I said, well, why did I receive the letter in March then? I said, again, it says for me to turn it in by the end of April. And she said, well, you would have been denied anyways because you didn't turn it in January. You know, so we got talking back and forth about it for a while. And she tells me, well, since you know you aren't going to get approved, do you want your appeal packet back? I said, no. I said, I still want to go ahead and file with the appeal I still want to move forward with it. That way, at least you have it on file. Even if y'all deny me again, at least it's on file. And she's like, all right. And she said, yeah, you should have had it in January. And, again, we're talking for a little bit more. And then she said, well, since you know you're going to get denied again, do you want your packet back? I said, no, go and hang on to it. That was pretty much the end of our conversation at that point. Um, I left the office and I'm driving, and I started thinking, if she's telling me I'm supposed to have the application submitted in January, why isn't it on this form I filled out? Why isn't it on the that standard of intensity paperwork that she showed me? Why isn't it on there? So that's where things stood after I filed my application, received my denial letter, and then again filed my appeal. Now, since then, actually, I had a hearing with the appeal board at the end of September. I'll be sharing with you all that information, what the results were in the discussion, and what the next steps are for this long process of trying to get my honeybees. This has definitely been a longer journey than I expected. Thanks for watching. Maybe everything I've been going through can help you out too on your process of trying to get an ag exemption. Until then, do work.